Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. Don't forget to subscribe. And it's Sunday, so we are doing breaches of the week. Ooh, this week in data breaches. Well, let me put it this way. This was a really great week to declare a data breach. Now, before I dive into that, today we're going to be talking about Aflac, Krispy Creme, UBS, 23andMe, Zoomcar, Sysco, not the rapper from the 2000s, Optima Tax Relief, which I remember their jingles, and even a Mother's Day brunch. But the reason why it was a great week to declare is because the cybersecurity news ecosystem and regular media has been slammed with the news of 16 billion passwords being leaked. And we're going to get to that one. But when the news like that consumes basically all of the cybersecurity news oxygen in the room, you declare a breach because you fly under the radar. Oh, 16 billion. Everybody's looking at the 16 billion. By the way, Krispy Kreme got breached. That's essentially what's happening. So here are the ones you probably didn't hear about, including some of those ones I just talked about. So the first one we're going to start with is out of India, and that's the car-sharing platform Zoomcar. They disclosed a data breach that impacted approximately 8.4 million people after a threat actor essentially contacted the company after claiming to access their database. Now, Zoomcar, as I mentioned, is based in India, but they operate in approximately 100 cities across India, as well as Egypt, Indonesia, and Vietnam, as well as other Asian countries, and they have over 10 million users. So we're talking names, phone numbers, email addresses, car registration numbers, and home addresses caught up in this. So heads up to my Asian and East Asian listeners. Moving on, Covenant Surgical Partners. They recently disclosed back to the United States that they were a victim of a data breach that involved health information, names, address, contact info, medical records, date of birth, insurance information, payment information were impacted for 88,609 people across the United States. So heads up to Covenant Surgical Partners patients. Moving on. Let's head on over to Germany and talk about the email hosting provider Cock.li. Leave your Snickers at the door. Now, they confirm they suffered a data breach after threat actors exploited flaws in their now retired Roundcube webmail platform and stole over 1 million user records. Now, this incident exposed basically all users who had logged into the mail service since 2016, an estimated 1,023,800 people, along with contact entries for an additional 93,000 users. So here's the interesting one about Cock.li or Cockly. Is simply this. This is actually one of the favorite private email platforms that a lot of threat actors use in ransomware. They don't just all go to Proton Mail. Cockly is one of those big ones as well. And we are talking in terms of exposure of those million plus people, email address, first and last login timestamps, failed login attempts and count, language, the serialized blob, meaning the data storage of the Roundcube settings and email signature, contact names for about 10,400 of those accounts, contact email addresses for those 10,400 accounts of a million, as well as V-cards and comments for that small subset. So heads up to you, if you're listening to this or watching this and you're a threat actor using Cockly, hopefully you got caught. Everybody else, I hope you didn't. Moving on. Let's do our mini segment simply entitled, if you just spent money for cybersecurity, you wouldn't be getting data breach, you wouldn't be losing your reputation, and I sure as heck wouldn't be talking about you right now. And with that, let's start with Sysco. That's right, the big American company that supplies food, etc., etc. They just agreed to a $2.3 million class action lawsuit settlement to resolve claims from their 2023 breach. Beyond that, you have until September 8th to go get paid. So if you're caught up with Sysco, check it out. Moving on, Belk. Belk, whatever they do. Anyway, 2 lawsuits were filed this week against Belk for a data breach and allegedly trying to conceal the cyber attack. In both cases, the plaintiffs are also seeking certification for class action suits. So if you use Belk for your belking needs, I don't know, you might get paid. Moving on, 23andMe. A couple of weeks ago, it was Canada, and I was talking about the Canadians. Now I'm talking about the Brits because we're heading to the UK. 23andMe has been fined £2.31 million sterling, that's about 3.11 million US, by the UK watchdog over the data breach in 2023, which impacted thousands of UK citizens. So the ICO, or Information Commissioner's Office, basically said 23andMe, obviously they filed for bankruptcy, has failed to put adequate measures in place to secure sensitive user data prior to the incident. I think we're going to see more of these. And the reason why I think we're going to see more 23andMe's coming out by government is essentially the governments are trying to get paid through the bankruptcy hearings, for the fine. So I think basically this is like the vultures picking through the bones. But quite frankly, I'm a big fan of finding a company, bankrupt or not, if they're violating data privacy laws wherever they are. Moving on, and speaking of data privacy failures, AT&T, because U.S. District Judge Ada Brown in Dallas, Texas, granted preliminary approval this past Friday for a $177 million settlement that resolves lawsuits against AT&T over breaches in 2024 that expose the personal information belonging to tens of millions of their customers. So heads up to you, AT&T users, you're going to get your $10 sooner than later. And with that, those were basically the fines, the payouts, and the lawsuits of the week. And if any of them had just spent money, we wouldn't be talking about them, they wouldn't be losing their reputation, and they wouldn't be going broke. So with that, let's talk about Philadelphia insurance companies. Not in general, that's the actual name of the company. They had a cybersecurity incident, but the only thing I could find was behind a paywall for a legal site. And so heads up, if I have more information, I'll tell you about it next week. Moving on. Let's head on down to Kentucky and talk about the Lake Barkley State Resort Park, because they had a data breach involving guests' credit card information, and those credit cards were used to guarantee reservations for a recent Mother's Day brunch event. That's right, we're ruining Mother's Day today. That kind of sucks, even though it was back in May. Now, according to state park officials, they've identified and contacted the individuals who were caught up in this, and so if you took your mom to the Lake Barkley State Resort Park in scenic Kentucky, and it is a very scenic state, heads up to you. Moving on. Healthcare tech firm Episource, they are pretty big actually. The attackers stole information on millions of people in an incident that was discovered in early February. We're just learning about it now. But documents filed with Health and Human Services show that 5,418,866 people had information stolen by virtue of this. Now, the Episource data includes Social Security, health insurance IDs, Medicare, Medicaid ID numbers, medical records, the covering doctor diagnosis, test results, images, care and treatment, and on and on and on. So never a good sign when supply chain gets hit. Moving on, let's talk about Aflac. And quite frankly, I actually love the marketing genius of that, especially because I got Ben Affleck to complain about it live. So Aflac, the insurance provider, essentially disclosed on June 20th that it had suffered a data breach that may have compromised personal information held by the company. Now, according to Aflac, it noticed suspicious activity on June 12th and started investigating. Their press release basically stated that they did not find any evidence of ransomware, but they don't know the extent yet. The breach may include social security numbers and other sensitive information. Now, what we do know is that hacking group Scattered Spider is basically now focusing on the insurance industry, and that's what they do. They focus on one basically vertical at a time, and now they're focusing on that. These are the guys that hit MGM Resorts and Caesars back in 2023. That was a massive data breach, and so now they're turning their gun sights on the insurance company. So Aflac may be the first, but they're definitely not going to be the last I'm reporting on, and that really, really sucks. So heads up to you. Best of luck, Aflac customers. I do like your duck. Moving on, Optima Tax Relief. I know their jingle from television commercials. Optima Tax Relief. It's crazy, but here we are, Optima Tax Relief. So, the ransomware group Chaos claims to have basically breached Optima's system, stealing 69 gigabytes of data before encrypting everything internally, and so it's a double extortion. Now, the data stolen includes what appears to be sensitive corporate documents and customer case files, and we're talking about tax documents, so social security numbers, home addresses, a whole bunch of identifiers. So if you've attempted to get tax relief from Optima, heads up to you. Oof, you may be in more trouble. Moving on, Krispy Kreme, the donut franchise here in the United States, and now it's personal because I do love me some warm Krispy Kreme. Now, they basically confirmed that thousands of people in South Carolina may have had their personal information stolen in a cyber attack late last year. Krispy Kreme said it became aware of unauthorized activity on their systems in November of last year, and some personal information may have been compromised. We're talking names, social security, driver's license, financial account information, health insurance information, and other personal records. So Krispy Kreme employees, especially in South Carolina, and Krispy Kreme is a southern-based chain, heads up to you, although we have them in the north as well. Moving on, Chain IQ. Now, they first communicated that they had a data leak on June 13th. I actually couldn't find much about this, except for the fact of a couple of different things. One, They have subsidiaries in New York, London, Singapore, Mumbai, and Bucharest, Romania. But we know about this because they've had some major supply chain announcements now as a result. So one of their customers, UBS, the big financial outfit, is now saying 130,000 employees is caught up in this, and Pictet for tens of thousands of invoices from a number of their suppliers in recent years. So Chain IQ is a quintessential supply chain breach, which may get worse because if they've got UBS, odds are they've got others. So I'll keep you up to date on this as this kind of stuff unfolds. And all right, let's discuss the 16 billion password leak this week. And for the record, this isn't even the most interesting thing, I think, that has happened in the past week in data breaches. But I want to talk about this because there's been a bit of, for lack of a better term, fake news regarding this. So I've seen some people on forums basically attribute this to Aflac. That is absolutely incorrect. Aflac just happened to hit at the same time, but this was basically all over the map in terms of basically reporting. So let's dispel some of this a bit. Now, as you know or may know, news broke earlier this week about, quote, one of the largest data breaches in history, end quote, which obviously then blew up, widespread media coverage and all of that. Fear-mongering naturally basically comes with that as well. But all this is a compilation of previously leaked credentials stolen by basically things like InfoStealer malware, exposed data breaches, credential stuffing attacks, all this kind of stuff. This is not a data breach. This is not a data breach. It's not a new data breach. It's not a breach at all. The websites and platforms involved in this were not recently compromised and had credentials stolen. These stolen credentials have been circulating for some time and basically just combined and aggregated. It's collected into basically, it's collected into a large database or data set, and that got exposed on the internet. So Cyber News was basically the first to discover these exposed data sets and these compiled data, and they stated it was stored in a format commonly associated with InfoStealer malware, but they didn't share the actual samples of that so that, people like me and other researchers could look at this. Now, an InfoStealer, for the record, as I mentioned, is malware and attempts to steal credentials, cryptocurrency wallets, any other data from an infected device. Over the years, InfoStealers basically are a huge problem around the globe, and similar credential collections, for the record, have been found in the past. So basically last year, the biggest data breach ever that got sensationalized was called RockU 2024 that had over 9 billion records. Again, this is not a data breach. This is a combination of information from past data breaches. So there's no evidence that this new compilation is basically new or previously unseen data. It's basically RockU 2025 with like a whole bunch more. And the other side of it is, if you sift through the 16 billion and start removing duplicates, you're down to about 3.5 billion unique passwords from everything that I understand about this. So it's not as big as you think, but we do have to talk about it because as a result of it, everybody's looking at that and nobody was looking at Aflac or UBS or Chain IQ or any one of the ones that I just mentioned. And here we are. That's why you pay attention. That's why you tune in here. And with that, let's go to our finally, because I think this is the most interesting and concerning of the week. And this would be the San Diego Police Department using a platform known as Flock. Now, here's what's going on with this. Basically, the San Diego PD, they have an automated license plate recognition database, and that was searched nearly 13,000 times in the early weeks when they initially implemented this in 2023 and 2024. That's a concern, obviously, right out of the gate, because privacy advocates are alarming on this, and it stems from the potential for data breaches and also cross-agency data sharing from automated license plate readers. Those are known as ALPRs, for the record. So in a memorandum to the city's Privacy Advisory Board this past Friday, the department admitted to an almost 3-week period during which other California law enforcement agencies were able to search the San Diego ALPR database. So the San Diego PD uses Flock for this process. Flock is based in Atlanta, and Flock has a network of searchable databases of other law enforcement agencies across the nation that basically they can allow interchange and access across. So in other words, if Flock has, an ALPR database in New York, they could share it with San Diego and vice versa, on and on and on. So San Diego's settings were meant to bar other agencies from searching San Diego specific data, but there was a misconfiguration leading to almost 3 weeks where the database was open to outside searches. And so that's the thing. And the reason why we're talking about this, and this is concerning, is that ALPR concerns have grown in recent weeks. So immigration raids are increasing, especially in Southern California. So San Diegans have expressed worries that the ALPR technology could be used to target immigrants, legal, illegal, whatever, especially if the data is shared with federal law enforcement agencies such as Homeland Security or ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. California law, for the record, prohibits the sharing of ALPR data with out-of-state federal or private agencies, but obviously San Diego left this open. Now, whether that was intentional or not, I was not able to find. In other words, somebody said, oops, let's share anyway. Odds are it was just an honest mistake. But according to the San Diego Police Department's 2024 annual surveillance report, information was shared with Homeland Security and Customs and Border Patrol about 10 times or so. So that's not bad. But we've also seen essentially how these ALPR systems through Aflac and platforms like that can basically work. So, for example, there was a case in Texas in the last few weeks or so of a woman who had fled Texas, and basically, from what I understand, it was over basically Texas's laws on abortion. I'm not getting political here, for the record. This is what's happening. You could be all for this or all against it. This is what's happening. And so, as she fled the state by car, Texas was requesting access to other ALPRs in basically neighboring states and spreading out as they were searching for her, obviously by her vehicle and her license plate. So this is something that we have to take into concern. We essentially have been growing an internal surveillance state. We've been doing it for years, and other countries have as well. Think about every Ring doorbell. And the police departments love to give out Ring doorbell because Amazon has literally given them footage, sometimes without warrants. So we have these things that are happening, that are growing, and it's something of deep concern. So as we are looking at this, and again, I don't care what your stance politically is on immigration or not, we also just have to ensure that as we have a constitutional right to privacy, as been interpreted, for the record, multiple times by the Supreme Court over literally decades, this is something that we have to make sure that is near and dear to our hearts, that we are taking concern and consideration to understand how are these ALPRs are sharing our data, what our state laws are regarding that, what happens if you drive out of your state into another state, does that state share? These are things we now have to understand, and we now have to put laws in place against to basically ensure our privacy. And that's something that the United States just doesn't have, which is a good set of privacy laws. I've talked about this before, but a lot of them were written in the Reagan era, and we haven't had much since. So here we go. Those were your breaches of the week. Good, bad, or ugly. 16 billion passwords. Not as big as you think it is compared to other things going on. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, where you're going to be data mined. Same with YouTube, but hey, we keep plugging away. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private, informed, and secure. Take care.